Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm pruning my roses, and yet I realise that for many people, hacking away with a pair of shears in September is not really the standard way to prune roses, but it works really well for the old shrub roses. These are the multi-stemmed roses which flower in June and go on into July, but it's once only, and that's it. But they go on growing after that, and some of them really quite vigorously, particularly in a year like this year when it's been rather wet. So if you leave them, those vigorous growths can act as a sail in the wind, and you get windrock, and that can disturb the roots. And of course you don't see that, but it will affect the way that it grows and flowers next year. The second thing is it tidies it up. So you just clip them back by about a quarter. Treat it like clipping a hedge. These are tough shrubs and they'll take it. And this is the perfect time of year to do this particular job. I, in fact, go over them in February with a pair of secateurs and just remove any very old growth or crossing branches or anything that's obviously damaged. And that's not a bad idea. Now, this applies to the old classic roses. The modern shrub roses are still flowering. And I've got lots here at Longmeadow, and I wouldn't dream of cutting those back until the last flower has finished. So leave those alone. Just cut the old ones, and if you're not sure which is which, well, it won't hurt if you don't prune them at all. Now, coming up on today's programme, Rachel celebrates the colours of that late summer favourite, the aster.
No matter the size of your garden, I mean, we can all grow asters, filling the space with colour, attracting pollinators and other beneficial insects right the way through the season.
We explore a garden in Gloucestershire whose owner has created a haven reflecting his Tibetan heritage.
I love cosmos because it reminds me of a Tibetan meadow. In Tibetan, it's called Kalpasangbu, which is also good kind of life, flower of happiness. I feel like I'm kind of home.
Adam discovers how the garden of Peckover House in Cambridgeshire has been restored to its former Victorian glory.
What's the thinking behind it? Because you've got no pictures or any plans for this.
No, it was pretty much a blank canvas here.
Yeah.
So we're using inspiration from paintings to design this Victorian-inspired mingled border.
And I shall be doing an experiment with garlic. I'm adding grit to what is already quite a gritty compost mix because we're at that time of year when planting spring bulbs is the biggest and central job. Really, for the rest of this month and throughout October, I try and get in all my spring bulbs both into the ground, into grass, into pots, except for tulips. So daffodils, irises, scillas, muscari, and what I'm going to do today is some hyacinths. And for all these bulbs, drainage is key, otherwise they can rot. Now, we tend to think of hyacinths either as bedding or as indoor Christmas plants. But to grow hyacinths for forcing for Christmas, they need to be heat treated. So if you're buying them for that, just make sure they're clearly stated that they're heat treated. Or they'll be like this. And this is a variety called City of Harlem, and it's a lovely soft yellow. It should match exactly the colour theme that I've got for the mound. And the way I'm going to use it is to put it in pots flanking the steps as they go up. Now, I've got the pots here with good drainage, and you can see that as well as these side drainage holes, there's a big drainage hole at the bottom. And I'm going to put a crock in over that. So I'll do one in each pot, and then put compost in. Half fill them like that. And the bulbs should always be planted, whether it's in a container or in the ground, at least with the bulb's height of soil above it. So with this hyacinth bulb, that means that much soil. If you can get it twice as high, so much the better. And I'm going to put 6 in each pot. Hyacinths have quite a large flower head, And as they come up, you need room for them to grow. Otherwise, what tends to happen is they splay out and they flop. And then you need to put sticks in and support them. And I will cover these over. A bit more in that one. Now, I always dress them with grit. So I will just sprinkle a bit of grit over the top. It doesn't have to be too thick a layer, like that. And that does a number of things. For a start, it looks good. Secondly, it stops the compost capping. And capping is when it gets wet and then it dries out and you get a crust on the top. And that can make it hard for the bulbs to push through. And finally, as it rains, the compost can splash up and muddy the petals. And you have grit on top that keeps them clean. When I finish potting all these up, I'll give them a good soak, and then they won't need watering again until I start to see shoots appear, probably next February or March. So I tend to put them underneath a bench, let them get cold, but don't let them get drenched. I would stress that there is going to be nothing to see here till next February at the earliest, and probably even as late as March. Now, last September, Rachel went to a garden near Worcester, which has one of the stars of any autumnal border.
The end of summer, as it begins to slip into autumn, is for me one of the most magical times of the year. You've got that lovely warmth of the low sunlight. The air's just beginning to cool, but there are still so many beautiful plants to see. And top of the list for me are asters, Michaelmas daisies, which I absolutely adore. This garden in Worcestershire is home to a national collection of asters. And Dr. Margaret Stone has curated very carefully this selection of plants in wonderful pastel colours. And it's very much a living museum. I think, Margaret, for me, the magic about asters is the way that they bridge these seasons and have such a long flowering period. What is it for you that really draws you to them?
Colour. The density of colour you get at this time of year. Late September, October, I don't think there's anything to beat Michaelmas daisies. A real bank of colour.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the scene is just extraordinary.
When we first moved to the garden, I was recommended a nursery. Old Court Nurseries, the Picton Garden, have a collection that is roughly called Autumn Asters because they collect all of the different types of asters. I bought a collection of 10. Each year, because I have an October birthday, I treated myself to a few more and the collection gradually built up.
Well, you know, I've got an October birthday too, so maybe that is the sort of the appeal, you know, something to do with the excitement of this time of year. I know there are so many asters, but the Novae Anglii and the Novae Belgii, tell me a bit about the difference between those two very popular groups of plants.
Novae Anglii are easier for gardeners because they can be left in the ground for a long time and they still flourish, whereas Novae Belgii do need to be propagated more frequently by division. The Novae Anglii tend to be tall. They're mainly about 5 feet tall in good conditions. In my collection, I've got 1 species and 92 cultivars. There are 1 or 2 that I don't have that are on my wants list.
This one, Margaret, this is really striking, isn't it?
This is one of my favourites. This is an old variety called Lion Beauty. I like the crimson circle that goes around the centre.
Yeah, it's really beautiful and, again, absolutely smothered in flower and a good compact size and shape.
Yes.
I think people do worry about mildew with asters, sort of that reputation. Do you find it to be a problem?
Novae Anglii don't get mildew. Novae Belgii can get mildew, but it tends to come because they're not sufficiently well cultivated. If they are given sufficient moisture, divided sufficiently often, then they don't get mildew. So in other words, if they're looked after well. I started planting the collection in order of colours. Along here I have all the purples. Here is Bar's purple, which is a very old variety. I think it's a really good garden plant. It's shorter than many of the newer ones.
It's lovely, isn't it? It's really got a good compact shape.
Yes.
And very floriferous. I mean,
Yes.
there's masses of flower on there.
These are quite different.
Quite different, very different.
Well, the one in the centre is Mandy's Choice, which I don't always stay out late at night to watch my flowers, but it's supposed not to close up at night. Whereas most Novae Anglii, I shut the flowers in late afternoon. So for flower arrangers,
Yes.
which you're interested
That's got
in,
staying power.
yes, that's good for a flower indoors.
That's very good to know. I think there's something about the softness of that pink as it sort of drifts off and the sun is just catching them is really enchanting, actually. I must say, when you see them like this, just the range of sizes, colours, form, just wondering with the colours how pollinators react to those colours, whether they're sort of more drawn to some than others.
Honeybees, I know, can see in the ultraviolet part of the spectrum, so they see the plants quite differently from the way we see them.
Certainly have a way of communicating with pollinating insects because obviously the centres are this lovely orangey, goldy yellow, and then once they're pollinated, they turn brown, don't they? So it's almost a message saying, don't come here, I've been pollinated, go somewhere else. I have to say, just seeing this fills me with joy.
Thank you.
It's fascinating to see a collection of a single type of plant, but I also really love looking at how Margaret uses those asters in more of a garden setting. And here, they're combined with all sorts of other perennials. There's the Verbena bonariensis just sort of bobbing around in the breeze, and this wonderful dark gold rudbeckia, and that gold is then picked up in the centre of the aster flowers. So the whole thing just ties together, and none of it's sort of overly staked and propped up and standing to attention. It's all a bit lax and flopping over, and it has that softness and movement, which is wonderful. Now, here's something that certainly made me rethink where you can grow asters, because conventionally, they're supposed to want full sun. And yet, here we are. This is Aster asran, underneath a conifer with a few ferns and things dotted around, absolutely happy as Larry. This lovely, pale, soft mauve really just illuminates and brightens what could be a very dark corner. So, dry shade is suddenly an asset. Margaret has filled her garden not only with an extraordinary national collection of Michaelmas daisies, but asters of all kinds. Here they're self-seeded, they create this sea of colour. But no matter the size of your garden, I mean, we can all grow asters, just choosing one or two that we really love and filling the space with colour, attracting pollinators and other beneficial insects right the way through the season.
You can visit Dr. Stone's garden and enjoy her asters for yourself, because this Sunday afternoon it will be open as part of the National Garden Scheme. And if you go to our website, you can get the details of the hours when it's actually open and also the address and directions of how to get there. Now, here in the Jewel Garden, there's been quite a dramatic shift from summer to autumn, and a lot of the colour has gone. But there is still quite a lot of orange remaining, thank goodness. So you've got the orange from the David Howard dahlias, the Tithonias, which always are marvellous. And at last, the gingers are flowering. This is called Assam orange. And normally it starts flowering, well, certainly by early August, sometimes late July. But this year the flowers didn't develop until the beginning of this month. And they, with a few other bursts of orange, are just keeping the colour flying for a few weeks longer. Good boy. Sit. There's a good boy. This is the lawn that I sowed in May. And you can see it's got established quite well. And we've got a lawn which my grandchildren can now run up and down on, which was one of the main reasons I've made it. The other reason, which is equally important, is that it is a green, calm interlude between the busyness of the cottage garden and the exuberance of the jewel garden. But if you have a lawn of any kind, whether it's new like this one or a long-established one, some work now will really improve it for next spring. The first thing to do is very simple. If you've got a wire rake, just give it a good scratch. Give it a good rake to gather up any loose material. And even on this young grass, you can see what's happening. You can see that dead and loose grass, maybe little bits of moss, are all coming out. This is called thatch. And by removing this, you're removing really a mulch that's going over the grass. And what you're going to be left with is some bare soil. Don't worry. You need that and you want it. This is not to make the lawn look better now, it's to make it look better next spring. Having done that, you then need to aerate it. Now, the simplest way to aerate a lawn is simply with a fork. Just put it in the ground and wiggle it about. Lawns get compacted. Even the rain will compact them, and certainly little feet running around, or bicycles, or footballs, or Wellington boots pushing a wheelbarrow. And grass really doesn't like compaction. If you've got a big area of lawn, you can hire aerators. And the last thing to do is to seed over any bare patches. So simply just sprinkle the seed like that. It's good, isn't it, Ned? Look at that. It will germinate in days if the weather is at all mild, and then it will stop growing round about the end of October. Don't mow it, try not to tread on it, leave it till next spring, and then it's got established, it will grow away quickly, and you can start to mow it next March or April, and you won't even know that it's freshly sown. We're now going to a garden in Gloucestershire. It belongs to Tashi Donda. And for him it is extra special because it includes many memories and associations of his Tibetan heritage.
Sunflowers, for me, it symbolizes the sun, and I'm a very symbolic person also. It symbolizes the energy of sun and moon is male and female energy for me. You need both moon and sun to grow. When I was young, I don't know the word garden. If I knew the word garden or seen garden, then I think I would love to have one, even when I was young. I grew up in orphanage school in India for Tibetans who doesn't have parents. As a kid, going into nature was kind of, for me, kind of relief because I feel very sort of discomfort in classroom and teachers, and I was never good in studying and never got interest to it. So the nature really comforted me. When we arrived in this garden 11 years ago in Stroud, it was just full of concrete. So there was nothing in this garden so much. It's only that crab apple. That's the only thing in this garden which is nature. The rest was just yeah, concrete. I don't go on holiday so much, so I'm trying to bring places which I love to go in our family garden. So this is a tropical bed. When I sit there on the chair, have a cup of tea or coffee, I felt like, oh, I'm in different space. With seeing bananas, tree fern. We've got cannas here. The cannas is very easy to grow from seed. Growing from seed makes you cheaper and more plants. So most of these plants really need sun, basically, to flower, to change color. And that one, Albizia, common name is Persian silk tree. That is the plant which I say it goes to sleep in the evening. Because when the sun comes, it opens the leaf. When the sun goes down, it closes the leaves and it goes to bed. Like I will go to bed. I love my children to grow stuff. So the younger one liked her to sow all my sunflowers every year. The sunflowers she saw just grew and grew and grew, and it was so tall. So she jumped on my shoulder, she raised her hands up, she couldn't touch it, and that's what she was amazed about, what the seed can do. It's a miracle, it's a magnificent, it's just, yeah, it just makes me happy.
Yeah, and then I'll take the Chinese money plant in and give it to the teacher.
Oh, that's nice, that's beautiful, yeah. I'm sure she will like it. Yeah. Everything in this garden, all the flowers are all sown by seed. I love seeing plants grow, which teach me lots of things about patience and resilience, or, yeah. This is called Macronopsis lincum, but the common name is called Himalayan poppy, or blue poppy, or Tibetan poppy. This plant is quite tricky to grow, but you need lots of patience. If you have, yes, you will manage to grow them. I failed 3 times. I realized my mistake because in England we have lots of rain. Cold doesn't kill it, but too much water can kill this plant. I put some perlite underneath for well drained. You put the soil, you put the gravel on the top, and then you sprinkle the seed on the top, like you're trying to mimic in the nature how it does naturally. But they shouldn't be grown in the hot place, like greenhouse or something, so it needs shaded place, cool. If it's going to be heavy pouring weather, I will cover the lid so it don't drench from the rain. This plant species is quite endangered now in their native habitat, and I must give a hand to save it. So this is the Macronopsis bed I just created. It's quite new. This is the 2nd year, grown from a seed. I feel very happy and to be proud, and I feel it like it's touched my heart because it's from my hometown. So this is a chili plant, 3 years old, and I love growing chilies. This is called Bud Jolokia, and the common name is called ghost pepper. If you like spicy chili, then this is a plant you can go for it. But I warn you, it's very, very spicy. I love it, I love it. I store it in oil so it keeps fresh and longer. Most people like to grow chili as an annual, but if you look where they are from, most of the northern Himalayan region chilies, they are perennial. So you can keep them alive if you have space, and it will get more bushy, and it will grow as a small bushy tree. To care for winter, I cut all the leaves, only the leaf, not any branches, because they will die naturally. Take it somewhere just above 5 degrees. You store it in a light place, not dark. Don't water too much, and then that's it. I love cosmos because it reminds me of a Tibetan meadow. In Tibetan, it's called kalpasangbu, which is also good time, good kind of life, flower of happiness. I feel like I'm kind of home. So, but power of growing for me, it's healing, it's calming in your nature, and third thing, very important, it makes you grounded. Once you are grounded, nothing can shift you. I do garden to give back to the Mother Nature, which I'm grateful to be alive on this beautiful green planet. That's why I love growing anything which gives you joy.
I really like the way that Tashi expressed something which I suspect an awful lot of us feel, which is that gardening grounds you. And when you're grounded, nothing can shift you. And gardening doesn't solve many, if any, of life's problems, but it does help you cope with them. Now, my grapes this year have been better than they ever have been before. And there are two reasons for that. The first is that I thinned much more radically than I've ever done before. I would say we put on the compost heap 2/3 of the bunches of grapes when they were green. And that has meant that the ones remaining have had more chance to take in nutrients, more light, and more air. Now, we've got plenty of grapes to eat, far more than we can eat, actually, even though I've reduced them down. It's worth pointing out, now look at that. I mean, it's just cornucopia, fantastic. This, by the way, is a variety called Black Hamburg, and it's a dessert grape, so no good for making wine. The only slight issue with dessert grapes of any type is they tend to all ripen at the same time, and they're difficult to store. So you tend to pick them by degrees, which means that sometimes they're not fully ripe, but even when there's a touch of sharpness, they're still really good. And the luxury of growing your own grapes is really something. Now, still to come on today's programme. We visit a garden in Essex, where water and wildlife are the main attractions.
For me, a garden's not really a garden unless it's got water in it. Water just brings so much life and so much interest.
Adam explores the garden of a Georgian townhouse in Cambridgeshire that has been given a new lease of life by its dedicated team.
So when was this put in?
This was put in 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
The thinking behind this was to have a more resilient planting with pollinator-friendly plants, using the same colour palette of blues and whites.
But first, we're going to visit one of your gardens. And this comes from one of our viewers across the channel.
Hello, I'm Eric. Welcome to my garden here in Normandy, France. I've always liked to be in gardens, even though when I was a child I didn't have much opportunity. So today I'm there as much as possible. 12 years ago I decided to move to the countryside in order to create my own garden. Today I'd like to show you how I establish my perennial meadow using a no-dig approach. First, I mowed the existing lawn. Next, I laid down cardboard in 2 layers for better coverage, ensuring all tapes and adhesives were removed. Then I covered it with a mix of mowed grass, hay, and any other organic materials available from the garden, following permaculture principles. Ideally, I allow this setup to rest for several months before planting. So, when it's time to plant, I simply dig a small hole for each plant, which minimizes labor and soil disturbance, preserving local wildlife. To promote soil health during winter, I chop the cuttings from grasses and hardy plants into small pieces and scatter them on the ground. This not only nourishes the soil, but also helps retain moisture. It may be a little bit messy initially, but after a month, it blends seamlessly into the garden. Thanks for watching, à bientôt!
Well, thanks for sending us that, Eric. And that technique of no-dig, growing through a layer of cardboard covered with hay or straw, is one that I have used, and I know that it works well, but not as well as yours. That looks really good. Now, I'm going to try an experiment with growing garlic this year, because I know a lot of people grow garlic from supermarket cloves. These are some cloves from my own garlic this year, very small, but perfectly tasty. And here we have supermarket garlic, and I have to say that only cost 55p. So let's give it a go. I'm going to plant it into this window box. And if you're planting anything in a container, but certainly garlic, it does need drainage holes. Okay, so I've got drainage holes in the bottom, and then I'm going to fill it full of a free draining compost. Garlic likes good, rich soil, but good drainage. Right, spread that out. Whatever kind of garlic you use, you need to buy it as a bulb and then break it up. A lot of people do grow garlic from supermarket cloves, but if you want garlic that you know is virus-free and is well suited to your growing conditions, then probably it's a good idea to look for it from a reputable UK supplier. Select out the biggest cloves, and then smaller ones do not plant. In an ideal world, just use the biggest that you've got. The thing to note with any clove of garlic is that whatever size it is, the flat bottom end is where the roots will come from, the pointy end is where the shoot will come from. And the pointy end is up and the flat bottom end is down, and that's the way they should be planted. I'm putting these in a grid about 4 inches apart. Don't be tempted to plant them any closer than that. What we're trying to get is really nice big bulbs with lots of big cloves. And the closer together they are, the more they're going to compete for available nutrients and water. The reason why you plant garlic in autumn is because they need a period of cold to develop properly. At least a month, and ideally 2 months between 0 and 10 degrees. Because if you don't get that, you get this. This is one of my garlic from this year that hasn't broken into cloves. It's just one quite small bulb. Now, cover these over. I will water these, put them outside. It is important not to put this down on a hard surface, but to raise it up on anything, so any excess moisture can run away rather than sitting in a puddle. I will plant the next batch of garlic into a raised bed, and that will be a UK garlic, which I know is adapted well to my garden. And when they're both ready, which will be round about the end of June, early July, I can harvest them and we can do a comparison. Now we're going to Essex to visit the garden of Gilly McNaughton.
I'm Gilly, and this is my wildlife garden, which really is all about attracting as much biodiversity as possible. Oh, I haven't seen this one before. Look that up. I've created lots of habitats for wildlife in my garden, but there's one I love above all others. This is my wildlife pond. I really wanted it to blend with the garden and sort of merge with the grass so that it appears as a kind of pasture pond that you might find in a meadow. Like for me, a garden's not really a garden unless it's got water in it. Water just brings so much life and so much interest. So my pond, it's about 60 square metres, very shallow sloping margins, about 1 metre depth, which means that amphibians can overwinter in the bottom of the pond. There's a lot of blanket weed, but that's because it's quite a newly establishing pond. It's only a year old, and it is natural in the first stages. As the pond establishes and there's more competition from aquatic plants for the light and the nutrients, you'll find that the blanket weed subsides. But I've already seen smooth newts laying their eggs into it, so it's a really valuable and important stage in this pond's life cycle. In a smaller or more formal garden pond, you might be tempted to remove the blanket weed. It's best to do it sort of October, November time, when the fewest species are going to be affected. And I would always not just leave it on the side, but actually pick through it, because the creatures can't really escape. Things like snails or dragonfly larvae, and just pop them back in the pond. I've got ponds in my garden, but I've also got a whole garden in my pond. I love seeing all of the different aquatic plants through the seasons, the different leaf forms, and recognising the seedlings as they germinate. I've planted the pond to create a kind of diversity of structure in the marginal plants. So these upright stems are perfect for emerging dragonflies and damselflies. I find the aquatic plants really beautiful. This is water plantain. It has a beautiful spikelet of white flowers. I've also planted flowering rush, which has sort of pinky white flowers. This is brook lime, which has beautiful little blue flowers, and there's a lot of leaves at the water level, which is really good for newt egg laying. Fringed lily just romps across the pond. It's established really well, and it's got little tiny lily pads, and it has a beautiful yellow flower with tasselled petals. I've also planted marsh cinquefoil, which is in flower now, which has a lovely pink flower. So there's a real multitude of different plants that just add a whole new layer of interest to gardening. You can achieve a fairly natural-looking pond even in a smaller garden. In a small nature pond, I think things like water milfoil or hornwort are valuable. They're oxygenating plants, and they provide a lot of cover for all kinds of insects. We get a lot of deer and rabbits, and they nibble anything I plant, but they can't nibble things in the pond. So this is a more formal, traditional garden pond. At the moment, it's a little bit sterile. It's not offering as much as it could to wildlife. So I've bought some plants, and I'm going to pot them up and put them in the pond. I've got this beautiful water forget-me-not. There's water avens, arrowhead, which has these beautiful arrow-shaped leaves, and it also flowers, and water mint, which just smells gorgeous. I use hessian, which has lots of little holes in, which allow the plant to get its roots out into the water, but it retains the aquatic compost. I put a bit of gravel down so that it will help to weigh it down, but eventually the sacking will biodegrade. Ready to put in the pond. I'm going to plant them on this marginal shelf, about 20 to 30 centimetres of depth. They don't want to be too deep. These will bulk up. I'll also be planting some floating aquatic plants. And really what you're aiming for is to get about 50% cover of plants over the water surface, because that will help to outcompete the algae and blanket weed for nutrients and light, and it just creates a bit of a better balance in the pond, and hopefully will attract lots of different species as it establishes. What I'm seeking to create really is just a thriving, buzzing habitat that's just full of plants, full of interest. I'll never stop learning from the ponds. There's always going to be something new to identify, some new behaviour to observe. It's quite addictive. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when I'll have enough ponds.
Whilst there's no doubt that to get the most wildlife in your garden, you need as many diverse habitats as possible. If you just want to make a quick fix and introduce wildlife almost overnight, certainly putting in a pond and some long grass is going to be the most effective way to do it. And what Gilly's done is by making a pond surrounded by long grass, that's the gold standard. And I was also interested to see that she had blanket weed in the first year, which we don't have now in the pond, but I have had in the past. And if you've never had a pond, blanket weed can be really thick. It can be like rolls of felt that you take out. And of course, creatures do get stuck in that. I'm skimming off a bit of duckweed here, which is much lighter. And so by just leaving that on the side of the pond, water snails, any newts, beetles, can easily get out and get back into the water, and then in a day or two I'll come and collect it up and put it on the compost heap. As a wildlife pond, this is fantastic, but I want it to do more than that. I want it to look really good as a water feature in its own right, and that means I need to cut back and thin. And the timing of the thinning is dictated as much by the needs of the wildlife as anything else. So I can't leave it till winter, because that would disturb the hibernating creatures at the bottom of the pond. The best time really will be towards the middle and end of October, so I will get in and do a lot then. Things like the water lily, and you can see how it's mounded up, and that's a really good sign it needs thinning, should be left till next spring. So timing is important in these things. But actually, I'm going to leave it alone now because I've got something else I need to be getting on with. Come on then. These are some cornflowers that I sowed at the beginning of August, and you can see they're now good-sized plants. They're in plugs, so they can't stay in here over winter, but I sowed them deliberately in August to plant out now here in the Paradise Garden. It's a variety called Double Blue, and as the name suggests, got really good blue flowers. In fact, you can just see there are a few little flower buds appearing, although you expect them to be at their best in June and July. But I wanted these to get ahead, because my plan is to plant out here into the Paradise Garden, not to give me a display this autumn, but to fill a gap between the end of the tulips and the arrival of the roses. I'm hoping that these will flower in May to fill that gap. And the beauty of growing in plugs is it's really like having them in a pot. It makes them terribly easy to plant. All you have to do is just make a little slot and firm them in. And these are hardy. They will be fine over winter. Now, obviously, if it turns cold, and I have to say it's quite a chilly wind today, they won't do much growing. they won't get much bigger. But that's okay, because it's not the top growth that you're interested in. It's what's happening underground. And the soil will take at least a month or two to cool down. And so the roots will go on growing. And even if they stop growing in the middle of November, they will pick up again in March. So you'll get this really good root system, and they'll grow fast, and as I say, hopefully fill that gap. Now, 35 years ago, I went to Wisbeach in the heart of the Fens to visit the garden at the National Trust property of Peckover House. It was fascinating. I can remember it very clearly. I've never been back, but I've often wondered how it might have changed. Well, Adam went to pay it a visit.
Getting to have a nose around any garden, I think, is a complete joy. But when you visit one that was created centuries ago, there is a real depth to that story, and it makes me just want to explore.
And the gardens at Peckover House don't disappoint. They were created in the early 1800s by the Peckover family, wealthy Quakers whose love of plants inspired them to design a series of horticultural gems, with something to enjoy around every corner. What intrigues me is how much the garden today resembles how it was a couple of 100 years ago. So, I'm meeting head gardener Louise in a very traditional looking rose garden.
Hello, Louise.
Hello.
Lovely to meet you.
You too.
I really wasn't expecting this. Has this been altered? Was it here from the beginning?
So this is a classical Victorian design,
Yeah.
but actually none of this was here 30 years ago. It had been completely grassed over, everything had been taken away, and the only evidence we had that there was anything else here was from photographs and paintings from the Peckovers.
So you've created this from a photograph?
That's right, yeah, I'll show you. This is Alexandrina with her cat and some friends sitting around the rose garden in early 1900s.
That's incredible. So literally, you got the water lilies. Was the pool found or was it rebuilt?
The pool was completely rebuilt. The stones had actually been used to build another pond in the garden elsewhere. So the railings, the pond, and all the arches around the pond, they were all made new. But the water lily actually is from the original water lily that was in this photograph.
How did that come about?
There's a local resident who was given a piece of the water lily by the Peckovers, and she had had it in her pond all these years, and when they recreated the rose garden, she gave a piece back.
I bet she loves telling her friends that. It's a wonderful piece of history. And I love the cat.
Yeah, we think that's Marmee.
Marmee.
Yeah, Peckovers were very soft on cats.
Oh, I think I'd have got on her. Eh?
On the other side of the garden is a modern border with a totally different history. According to the archive, a huge greenhouse once stood here, then a rockery, and more recently, Victorian-style herbaceous planting.
Unfortunately, with changing climate and change in practices, we're not irrigating our bedding in the summer. The bedding was struggling whenever it got really hot, so we ended up taking all that away and starting afresh.
Cool. So when was this put in?
This was put in 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. So and the thinking?
The thinking behind this was to have a more resilient planting with pollinator-friendly plants, using the same colour palette of the alpine rockery that was here. Lots of blues and whites, linking back to that design.
So you've got that ode to the past, but that's within the colour scheme. Yeah.
That's right.
Soil-wise, free draining.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's quite silty, free draining soil.
Sunny. So the plants in here, things like the killias, the salvias, you know, the geraniums, everything working well?
Absolutely, yes. Everything that you can see is doing really well. We've got a lot of things, a lot of plants that are very resilient, they can take drought, and they seem to be able to cope with our winters as well. The only thing that's not working very well is the line of roses that are behind.
That you
and
can't really see.
actually see.
I was sort of thinking, hopefully you'll say it and I won't have to.
Yeah, they're doing terribly.
Yeah, so what was the thinking with those?
Those roses, they were heritage roses.
Yeah.
They were supposed to be a bridge between the planting at the front and the tall ramblers trained on the walls. But unfortunately, they're really struggling. We're not sure why, but they've been getting some disease. They're not filling out, and we've got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Any ideas, what you're thinking?
Something shrubby. We're thinking maybe species roses. We'll train those in to create a bit of height at the back of the border.
It's a huge question, I think, when it comes to looking after historic gardens and even moving them forward. What do you do when there's no photographic evidence or even a plan as to what an area should look like? Well, I think I'm just about to find out. I hope this is the right Achilles.
Yeah, that looks like the right one.
There you go.
Brilliant, thank you.
So, come on then, tell me what this is all about. I'm gagging to know, because it's all laid out that side, but actually at the moment it looks more like a cutting garden.
Work in progress, yes. All the plants you can see behind you are stock plants that we've been buying in, growing from seed and trialling in the garden. So they're all labelled, all lined in rows, so we know exactly what we've got, and they're ready to be divided in autumn.
But this designer in me, how are they being laid out? What's the thinking behind it? Because you've got no pictures or any plans for this.
No, it was pretty much a blank canvas here.
Yeah.
We don't have any historical evidence for what used to be grown here. So we're using inspiration from Victorian paintings of gardens at the time by an artist called George Samuel Elgood.
Right.
He'd painted lots of gardens from around Britain and across Europe. And yeah, they were beautiful, detailed paintings of herbaceous borders. And we're using inspiration from that to design this Victorian-inspired mingled border.
You're creating herbaceous borders that are very deep, very big, and you were to think back to if they'd have done this before, how many gardeners?
They had a big team. At one time, they had at least 14 gardeners here.
At least 14 gardeners, yeah. Fast forward, go on, what have you got?
Today, we've got 2 full-time staff and about 20 volunteers.
Yeah, which...
So we couldn't do it without them. It's absolutely essential to keep a garden of this sort of complexity going.
Every time I visit one of these gardens, I go home a happy man. And that's not just because of the beauty in front of me. The people that you meet care, they want to nurture, make sure this is here in another couple of 100 years' time. And you can see from the changes that are being made, we live in a different world. Gardens cannot stand still. And I think that is what makes them special.
It is astonishing to see the changes that have been made since I was last there. But what was there when I went 35 years ago was a marvellous orangery. And I remember a fernery, you went down steps into it. And in the orangery, they had the oldest oranges growing in Britain, the oldest surviving ones. I think they're 300 years old or more. And the gardener at the time gave me a cutting from that orange tree. And this is it. And a couple of years ago, it was blasted by cold and all signs of life went, and I thought I'd lost it. But you can see it's regrowing, and I think it's going to survive and be fine. So this is my little piece of Peckover House here at Longmeadow. Now, I've still got some more of these cornflowers to plant, but while I'm doing that, here are your jobs for the weekend. I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again before the year is out, but deadheading is one of the most relevant and important things you can do at this time of year. Anything that's in flower, whether it be dahlias, cosmos, roses, tithonias, will go on producing flowers if you remove the spent flower heads. And don't just cut them off at the top. Go down the stem until you come to a pair of leaves or another bud and cut there. Now is the time to plant out biennials, like these honesty. And that applies to foxgloves, wallflowers, forget-me-nots, all plants which have established their roots and foliage now, but won't flower till next spring. Put them where you want them to flower, and they will grow away and get nice, strong roots ready to perform at their best as soon as spring comes round. And of course, water them in well. Unlike apples, pears do not ripen on the tree. It's a two-stage process. So at this point, you need to test them by carefully lifting them to the horizontal. And if they come away in your hand, treat them as gently as an egg, and then take them to either a dark place to store or put them on a sunny windowsill to speed up the ripening process so that they're lovely and juicy and ready to eat. I think by and large this summer has been good in the vegetable garden. The weather may not have been perfect, but vegetables haven't minded too much. The changes in water and temperature. Chard always does well. It's doing particularly well this year. And the great thing about chard is it's one of those vegetables that you can grow almost 12 months of the year. I wouldn't be without it. I absolutely love it. But my favourite vegetable, particularly at this time of year, in early autumn and really up through till Christmas, is radicchio. It's a form of chicory. Sow the seed in spring, plant them out, and then they develop a mass of green leaves that are totally inedible. They're really bitter. But what they're doing is they're feeding the roots. And then it starts to heart up, rather like a cabbage, which as the weather gets colder, turns red. So there you have what looks like a sort of glorified lettuce, but if we start to take off these green leaves, and I hope, having done this, there is a red heart in here. Some of them are more white than red, some of them more red than white, some of them have their red on the inside of the leaf. But if I cut through this, you can see that it's got that red and white interior. And all the red and all the white is delicious. Well, that's it for this week. Next week, Frances will be with you at Powderham Castle, and you can join her at 8 o'clock. And I'll see you back here in Longmeadow in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.
you.